A Son to Clap For by Clarence Chance. The yard sat at a curious spot. If you approached from Rose Street at the point where it merged with Tulip Avenue, they could see you. And if you approached from Daisy Street where it met Tulip Avenue, they could see you from where they sat behind the zinc fence. They sat there day and night, peering through the holes in the fence, watching and waiting. The yard was not always theirs. The truth was, it was not theirs at all. Old woman Cassie had lived there for 30 years, selling coal and kerosene oil. When the war broke out, they decided they wanted it. They offered her a chance to leave peaceably, or they would burn her out, they said. One night, while she was in church, an alarm was raised. Fire! Fire! The shack at the rear of the yard where her coal was stored had been burned to the ground. When she was leaving in Mr. Ernest's old truck, old woman Cassie screamed, "The blood against you, Johnny Sparks! The blood against you, deportee!" Anthony Jackson had come to hate these men, even more now that Miguel, his neighbor and friend, had gone to join the gang. Coming from school, he had to walk by their base. Although he could, he knew better than to walk down Bottom Road. When the war had just broken out, Miss Princess's oldest son, Stephen, had gone down there to see his girlfriend, just as he had been doing for 4 years, and they shot him that Sunday night saying, "Is up that side him come from." Divided along geographical lines, men were fighting each other. Men who had gone to the same Sunday school, read from the same Bible, sat in the same class at primary school, were turning guns on each other over a piece of road work. Upgrading work was to be done on the main road, and both groups of men wanted to control the site, which meant that they wanted to be paid protection money and the right to decide who could be hired or fired. Allegations led to altercations. Altercations led to war. Anthony was passing by the zinc fence. He heard the dreaded voice calling to him from behind it. "Is Professor that?" Anthony did not answer. He kept on walking. The voice called out again. It started from behind the fence, came through the gate, and was presently on the side of the road. "Hey, Professor, is this you dissing me?" Anthony did not turn around until he heard a familiar voice, a voice he had been hearing since he was 5 years old and had moved from the country. "Professor, don't diss the big man." He turned to face them. The portee was there too, and about 6 other men, but it was his friend Miguel to whom he spoke. "Miguel, you're not going home to Miss Princess?" "I should go home for them to beat me again, Professor." Anthony might not have realized it, but he was holding on to Miguel's hands. "Please, little man," he begged. "Remember what happened to your brothers." Johnny Sparks plucked Miguel's hand from Anthony's. "Let go the man hand. I never stop you for that." He stopped, looked around and smiled. "I want you to bring Lizzie on the ends weekend for me." "Is my 14-year-old sister you're talking about, Johnny Sparks?" 14 or 40, he barked. "I want her on the ends by Friday." Now Johnny Sparks turned to the portee smiling. "She developing nice, you see, the portee. She fat like mudfish." The portee didn't smile. Last Easter, when Anthony's mother, Lizzie, and he himself were going to church, Anthony had seen the portee staring at them, staring even when they were turning off Tulip Avenue onto Primrose Street. Deportee pushed the gate and went back into the yard. It was Little Man who spoke. "Professor, tell Mama I'm all right. I'm amongst the big man. Is me cook and thing?" Johnny Sparks wanted Anthony's sister. He had already taken bright little Tanika Smith when she was 13 and Michelle Riley from Gully Lane and the Indian man's daughter, Shelley. At first, the Indian man had said, "Over my dead body." But then he had brought her to Johnny Sparks to be ravished. Later, Johnny Sparks boasted, "I made him an offer I couldn't refuse." No, he wanted Elizabeth. Anthony was sure of one thing. He would not tell his mother. She would go to the police. It was not always a good thing to go to the police. Miss Princess's second son, Jojo, had gone to the police when his bicycle was stolen. The same afternoon, police found a gun hidden in Miss Princess's yard. Jojo's lifeless body was found the next morning in the gully, at the top of Gully Lane, with a piece of cardboard thrown down on it with the words, "Police Informer," written in charcoal. People said it was Johnny Sparks' gun, so he was responsible for the crime. Some said of Little Man, "Fool boy. Him gone join the same man them was shoot him brother. Fool." When the priest was returning to Scotland, the church community kept a send-off party at the primary school for him. The community was invited. Little Man was the head chef. He prepared all manner of dishes with Italian and Chinese-sounding names, baked chicken, jerked pork, and peanut porridge. The men loved the peanut porridge. They said it gave them stamina. "It tough, Miguel. It tough for real," they said, knocking his fist and touching thumbs together. That same night, as he made his way home, those same men beat him for the third time. They said he had girl ways. He spoke like their sisters and washed woman clothes. Twice, when his mother was sick, he had washed her clothes. When Stephen was killed, and again when Jojo was murdered. Anthony sat there after Elizabeth and his mother had gone to bed, thinking about Little Man and the times they had had. For the whole night he sat in the living room, unable to sleep. His cell phone was alarming. It was 4:45 a.m., the time he would usually wake for school. His hand was reaching up to turn on the shower when 1, 2, 3, 4 shots rang out in the early morning silence. The scrambled egg sandwich he was having for breakfast almost choked him when he heard the frantic shaking of Miss Princess's gate and the excited voice of a woman shouting, "Miss Princess! Miss Princess! Them shoot Little Man!" Little Man was lying on his back, all 5 feet 2 inches of him. His eyes were open. They seemed frightened. Many times he had dramatically declared that he would be the best chef in the island. Now he lay dead, a boy of 19. The story being told was that Johnny Sparks had sent him to see if the other men were coming up. As he pushed his head around the fence, his torso followed, and a hail of bullets found him. Now it was 12:30 a.m., and Anthony was sitting in the living room thinking about Little Man and the times they'd had. Then his thoughts shifted to Elizabeth. There was only one day to prevent Johnny Sparks from having her. Someone knocked at the gate, softly at first. When he did not respond, the knocking came harder. "Who dat?" Anthony called. "It's me, the portee," the voice said. "We have a common enemy. Johnny Sparks caused the command death, and it's pure rape and murder I hear him talking about." "Hold on your voice," Anthony said, hearing his mother stirring. He unlocked the door and went outside. "The man them drink and smoke every Thursday night around the burnout shack at the back of the yard. I want you to help me deal with them case," the portee said. When the portee saw the fear in Anthony's eyes, he said, "It's your sister and yourself you're doing it for." Anthony heard his mother's voice coming towards them. "Is who you're talking to, Tony?" Before he could answer, his mother yelled, "I told you I don't want you down here. Leave, man. Leave now." All right, Margaret," the portee said. "I'm leaving." Anthony waited until his mother had gone back into her room and had settled back into bed before he went in and asked, "Mama, you know that man?" She did not answer. Anthony switched on the light and asked again, "Mama, you know that man?" "He's your father, Tony. He's your worthless father." "But Mama, you told me daddy in the States." "Until them deport him. And when I see how him wreck and how he mix up in criminal things and hear him smoking coke, I couldn't put myself to say he's your father that." She paused. The hardness and bitterness of the years, long covered up and soothed by religious convictions, were naked. Her face took on a pronounced contradiction. On the one hand, she wanted to be true to her religion, to be gentle, humble in spirit, but within her, a burning anger raged against the man she had loved, who had deserted her with 2 little children. When she tried to speak, the words barely crept out. A man can forget a woman, but a man should never forget him children." Anthony's mind was tangled, his palms sweaty. The portee had said to meet him at 7 p.m. They planned to enter the yard by jumping over the back fence. The portee was already there. "So, Margaret tell you," he said. "When I hear them calling you professor and saying oh you're bright, I feel so proud and so ashamed of myself. When I went up to the States, things were bad. So I started to sell drugs, and as soon as I start to use it, I get mixed up in some other things. Many times I felt like writing, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Then them locked me up down in the big house, and then them deport me. And when I find where Margaret live, she wouldn't have me. Nobody wanted a deportee around, so I just fall back into my old self." He stopped and seemed to think, and next seemed to speak to the elements. "I'm going to protect my children." Anthony was thinking he could forgive this man, maybe even grow to love him, when his father spoiled the moment by reaching into his waist, saying, "Take this. Hide behind the ackee tree. Only use it if any of them escaping around that side." Anthony changed the weapon from hand to hand, wiping his sweaty palm on his trousers and returning the gun to it. How could life be so cruel to him? He was a sixth form student. He had harbored thoughts of university, and here he was, holding a gun and getting ready to use it. His father had said the men were talking about rape and murder. Well, he would defend his sister. He waited. 8, 9, 10 o'clock. 10:08. He could hear talking. They were coming. He pressed himself hard against the tree. his hand squeezed tight around the gun. And then there was the racket of gunfire, the screech of tires, the whine of sirens, the gurgling sounds of death, and the uncontrollable wailing of women. Little winds blew over the lawn, the type that would mess with a woman's newly done hair and dislodge a hat here and there. All eyes and ears, though, were fixed on the professor. It was the launch of a foundation to aid inner city youths, a collaborative effort between the university and the Ministry of Youth and Culture. Professor Anthony Jackson was the main speaker. My father died that night, 25 years ago. He died taking 5 men with him, including Johnny Sparks. Why should paternal instincts have kicked in at that time in a drug addict? I don't know. Why should the police be patrolling at the very moment to rescue me from the other 2 men left alive? I don't know. What I do know is that our children need us, to love them when they are unwilling to be loved, to cause them to feel special, to protect them from the elements that seek their ruin. As he spoke, the professor's eyes caught the late afternoon sun, and in it he saw his childhood friend, Miguel, his frightened eyes. In the sun, the professor saw Miguel's brother, Jojo, lying on his back in the gully with a cardboard thrown down on the body. The professor's hands tightened around the podium. We need to build healthy self-esteem in our children. We need to take back our country from criminal elements, report every act that is outside of the law. Let us love our children. A quiet descended on the gathering. The Minister of Youth and Culture stood and applauded. Then, from all around the gathering, applause erupted for the man who had devoted all his adult life to the social salvation of the youths. Anthony looked into the gathering and saw his mother in the front row. Her silver hair captured the late afternoon sunlight. And what a golden sight Elizabeth made with her own 2 children and husband. Beside them was Miss Princess, clapping too, clapping vigorously for him, because she had no son to clap for.